It has been a while since I have been here. Yep, haven't really had any topics to talk about lately, honestly. But, lately I've been thinking about a few things. And primarily what I've been thinking about, from my previous experiences with other games, obviously D&D mostly, was this idea that a fantasy game has to have realism. Aspects of the game have to be realistic to real life. Things have to have some form of concrete rules. Yes, this is true. There has to be some form of concrete rules in your games in order for it to function properly, mechanically speaking. But in terms of narratives, I am of the opinion that realism ultimately hurts the creativity of both the players and the GM, because you are limiting yourself to what can be explained logically. What do you mean by this, Brook? Everything can be explained logically. Everything has a logical explanation in terms of a realistic parallel. Obviously. And in magical settings like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and other settings where there's fantastical elements, there are levels of realism to it. My favorite example that I like to use is Gundam. Gundam is an anime with giant mechs. But the mechs aren't like magical mechs like they use in Power Rangers, where they just work with no sort of thought or effort put into the actual mechanisms. Gundam is very much a show about advanced machinery that requires a lot of technical know-how in order to make the Gundams function the way you want them to. But if you take a step back and look at it, you can admire that, yes, it is an anime with very grounded, realistic ways of interpreting this otherwise sci-fi element. If you take a step back and look at it, you realize it's still a sci-fi element. It is still very much so far into the future for people to be able to fly around in deep space freely in the equivalent of giant humanoid mech suits with no other aid whatsoever, that it is in itself a suspension of disbelief. You know that this universe is advanced, but it is so advanced that you'll never actually get to see that point in your natural life. So it is wholly unrealistic for what you perceive to be reality. And in games like D&D, where there's magic, a lot of things can be explained away by, well, it's just magic. Now, the reason I bring this concept up is that over the years of playing many different campaigns of D&D, there's always been that guy, and near the end it was me, where I was very much a big stickler of the rules, but there was always that one person in the group that always had to say, but that's not really realistic. That's not really realistic. It wouldn't make logical sense. It doesn't make any logical sense. And I'm sitting here, for the most part, going, it's a narrative game. Like, yeah, there's mechanics to it, but if you're trying to tell a story, you have to suspend your disbelief on a lot of things, so why is this your breaking point? An example was, in one game in particular, which was very heavy medieval inspired, the GM said that there was like some advanced technology somewhere And one of our players, I can't remember his name anymore, it's been that long, he said something along the lines of, well, that doesn't make any sense. We're in a medieval fantasy. Where would such technology come from? And when the GM tried to explain, well, yes, but this is ancient technology, he would then rebuttal, but if it's ancient, how is it so advanced? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make logical sense. Even though it was an interesting story element and very interesting to everybody else at the table, this one guy was just so adamant on everything being realistic that it ruined it. And the GM ended up only playing for like 3 more sessions afterwards because his entire idea for this plotline was scrapped because this one player ruined it for him. And that's kind of where my rant is going to come in. Why is it that we have this notion in RPGs, tabletop or video game or otherwise, that it has to be realistic? Why does The Witcher have to be realistic? Why does Dark Souls or Demon Souls or Bloodborne or Elden Ring, why does any of it have to be realistic? If I'm playing Dark Souls and I jump off of the highest point of the map and I take no fall damage, are you going to enjoy the game less? Are you, realistically speaking? Probably not. You're still going to like the game. It's a weird decision, sure, but are you going to enjoy the game less because of it? No. So, I propose this idea where if you're playing a game like D&D or any tabletop game with your friends, learn to suspend your disbelief far greater than what you are willing to normally do, because story elements in the game that are facilitated by the mechanics and are encouraged by the rules, why do you care? If everything was realistic in every tabletop role-playing game, everyone would be required to use encumbrance. Everyone would be required to use gold weight. Everyone would be required to use water and food and sleep. Everyone would be required. It wouldn't be under an optional rules section. There wouldn't have to be supplements for hardcore gaming if it was required. If you want a realistic game, play a different game. But if you're playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, Fabula Ultima, Pathfinder, any of those style of medieval fantasy games, suspend your disbelief. Magic exists. You know, demons and gods and ancient technology that's somehow more advanced than anything that our modern day can create, but is like thousands of years old in their world, they exist. Just let it be. Not everything has to be realistic. This is not to say, I will clarify this right here, this is not to say abandon all rules, abandon all sense, and abandon all logic. This is to say that if an interesting story element comes about, and that story element not only is interesting to you, but is clearly interesting to the GM, and the rest of the players have no issues with it or have voiced no concerns about it, but you have a concern about how realistic it is, don't say anything. It's a game. You're meant to have fun. Don't take the game so seriously that the lack of realism is what's keeping you from enjoying the game. Just relax. It's a game. You're meant to have fun. And if you find realism fun, find a different game. Because if you're not having fun in a game that's not realistic, then you're not playing with the right group. Sorry to say. Just play a different game.